Hello, my name is Andrzej. This video is about the former Polish colony in Harbin, Manchuria, which together with Russians and other East Europeans transformed the small Chinese fishing village of Harbin into a thriving city of significant commercial importance. It is estimated that when the Polish colony was at its peak, which was between 1917 and 1920, up to 10,000 Poles lived in Harbin. The photograph you can see here dates from 1934 and shows schoolchildren from the Polish boarding school in Harbin exhibiting their works. The children are accompanied by Father Władysław Ostrowski and unnamed school teachers. This photograph was taken during the time of the Japanese occupation of Manchuria. More about that later on in this video. Towards the end of the 19th century, Russia wanted to build a railway line that would join the Russian cities of Chita and Vladivostok, and at the same time link up to the existing Trans-Siberian Railway. The shortest route between the two cities was through Manchuria in China. The project included a branch line to Port Arthur in the city of Dalian on the banks of the Yellow Sea. Port Arthur is today known as Lushankou district in Dalian. So why was the Polish colony in Harbin founded? The January uprising on the territory of Russian-occupied Poland occurred between 1863 and 1864. You can see a photo of Polish insurgents of the January uprising. Following this failed uprising, Tsarist Russia removed the last vestiges of rights still left to Poles and commenced an intensive Russification of the population. Poles graduating from technical institutions in occupied Poland and Russia had little chance of a prosperous career in their ancestral homeland unless they embraced this Russification. These onerous restrictions, however, were not so strictly enforced in the far corners of the Russian Empire. The construction of the Chinese Eastern Railway link presented far-reaching opportunities for engineers, entrepreneurs, and support workers from Russian-occupied Poland to advance their careers in Manchuria. As previously mentioned, such opportunities were impossible in their homeland. This was the beginning of a long-term migration of Poles to Harbin and the establishment of, in its heyday, a sizable and vibrant Polish community. This community was to last for nearly 50 years. Stanisław Kierbedź, who you can see in this painting, was a railway engineer and one of the project managers of the Chinese Eastern Railway. Kierbedź was favored by the Tsarist Prime Minister of the time and thus able to exert great influence in decision-making. It was due to Kierbedź's influence that some 20% of managerial and supporting roles on the railway were filled by Poles. Tsar Nicholas II, alarmed at the high ratio of Polish personnel working on the project, personally interviewed with his foreign minister to seek redress to this undesirable situation. The Tsar was informed by his minister that nothing could be done due to the lack of suitably qualified Russian personnel. Stanisław Kierbedź designed the first railway bridge over the Songhua River in Harbin. The bridge opened in 1901 and still exists as a protected monument. The bridge is a major tourist attraction of the city and is accessible to pedestrians. This bridge in Harbin no longer carries railway traffic. A newer railway bridge stands alongside Kierbedź's bridge. On an aside, Kierbedź was the nephew of another Stanisław Kierbedź, the designer of the Aleksandryjski Bridge that spanned the Vistula River in Warsaw. That bridge was destroyed during World War II. At the crossroads of the route to Dalian, Kierbedź instructed the Polish civil engineer Adam Szydłowski to map out and create the city of Harbin. You can see an early map of Harbin here. Ignacy Cytowicz designed Harbin's railway station. The station was constructed in Art Nouveau style and modelled on the style of the 19th century railway station in Siedlce, Poland. Jan Wróblewski established Harbin's first brewery in 1900. This brewery still operates and was the first to open in China. The image shown is a contemporary example of Harbin beer that you can buy in China today. There were numerous Polish newspapers published in Harbin. These publications covered local and international news, ladies' interests, Christian news, sports news, and more. Some newspapers kept publishing during the Japanese occupation. And in this example of the Polish weekly, you can see the Japanese permissions printed at the top right of the picture. Here are some more examples of Polish newspapers. And this one has advertisements. The Gospoda Polska in English translates to the Polish Inn, and the Gospoda Polska was essentially a Polish cultural centre. Following several rebuilds of the centre at Głucha Street, the considerably enlarged and more functional building was able by 1919 to more fully accommodate the many diverse cultural needs of the Polish diaspora in Harbin. Amenities at the Gospoda Polska included a theatre, library and reading room. The centre also functioned as an information point for Poles where they could be directed to employment and assistance from the community. The photograph you can see here is of a 1930 performance at the Polish Theatre in the Gospoda Polska. It is interesting to note the participation of Chinese people at the performance. Poles maintained social relations with the Chinese, and there were Chinese who took part in cultural events in the Polish colony. The restaurant at the Gospoda Polska. You can see a newspaper advertisement of the menu. The transcript reads, "We recommend home-cooked dinners of various kinds, snacks and miniatures, ice cream, our own barley soup, herring and marinated fish. Lunch times 1 to 4, 2-course dinner 0.40, 3 courses 0.50, 1 dish 0.25. Our motto, cheap, healthy and tasty." I'm not sure what currency this would have been in. If you know, please let me know in the comments below. What were the relations like between Poles and the Chinese in Harbin? In my research for this video, I came across an interesting article which gives a lot of insight into this. The following has been adapted from the article Roman in the Shadow of the Hubal Legend by Aleksandra Ziółkowska-Bum. I'll leave a link to the article below. You can see a photo of Aleksandra here. She tells us that Natalia Radziewicz was a school teacher in Harbin. Natalia and her husband Antoni Radziewicz, who had been deported to Siberia by the Russians, employed Chinese domestic workers in their household. The Radziewicz family was extremely well liked by the hard-working locals. When Natalia Radziewicz died, the Chinese workers willingly took time off work to attend Natalia's funeral. Among them were many friends of Antoni Radziewicz. He understood how to treat his employees. Following his work as an engineer on the Transbaikal Railway, he was appointed chief engineer of the locomotive maintenance shed. At one time, Antoni was giving a tour to some visiting inspectors. A teenage employee was using a hammer improperly. Angrily, one of the inspectors ran up and hit him across the face. Then he threw off his glove and threw it mockingly at his feet. Simply removing his own glove, Antoni Radzievich then demonstrated the proper hammer technique to the young worker using just his bare hand. He did this with measured calmness. The incident caused him lots of problems, including the possibility of losing his job. The Chinese workers witnessed the event. From that point on, they would obey him, stand by him, and express their thanks and enthusiasm. Coincidentally, I share the same family name with the Radzievich family from Harbin, but I am not related to them. The Museum of Oriental Studies in Harbin. The Literary and Scientific Courier newspaper in Poland, dated 29th of June 1931, carried an article about the museum. We are told that out of 3 Chinese studies museums on the territory of Manchuria, only one was in European hands. That was the Museum of Oriental Studies, recently established at the Gospoda Polska by Polish academics. The museum was divided into 3 sections. These were economics, natural science, and ethnography. Orientalist groups from China, Japan, and Russia had started visiting the museum and reported that the museum, with approximately 500 exhibits, had a bright future ahead. The priceless exhibits had recently been collected from the province of Heilongjiang by Kazimierz Grochowski. The tone of the article is one of great sadness, as in Poland, no people or institutions had expressed interest in offering financial help to the museum to ensure its continued success. The Museum of Oriental Studies in Harbin had been established in 1930 by the geologist Kazimierz Grochowski. Grochowski permanently left Harbin for Poland in 1934. The museum ceased to exist just 2 months after Grochowski's departure due to a lack of suitable personnel to administer it. The management of the Gospoda Polska had, as previously mentioned, hosted the museum on its premises. They came to the conclusion that there was no benefit in keeping the museum and decided to recover the 2 rooms allocated to the museum. Grochowski's young successors, remaining in Harbin, did not have enough influence to oppose this decision. The exhibits were packed into storage chests, and most of them disappeared under unknown circumstances. School education in Harbin. This is a photograph of the Henryk Sienkiewicz Secondary School in Harbin. This school was the most well-known educational institute in Harbin, established in 1915 and closed in 1949. In 1924, the Polish government recognized examination and leaving certificates issued by the Henryk Sienkiewicz Secondary School in Harbin as valid in Poland. The scan you can see here is a certificate issued to a student called Władysław Niewiadomski. Religious life in Harbin. The associated photograph shows the Roman Catholic parish church of St. Stanisław, built by the Polish civil engineer Mikołaj Kizigirej. Construction of the church commenced in 1906, and the church was consecrated in 1909. Industrious life of Poles in Harbin falls upon hard times, and the colony declines in size during the Japanese invasion of Manchuria. We learn from the article Roman in the Shadow of the Hubal Legend by Aleksandra Ziółkowska-Böhm that, as soon as the Japanese seized Manchuria, they gave preferential treatment to the large Polish population residing in Manchuria. At first they offered them many privileges and enticed Poles to work for them. At the same time they declared that the children of Poles would be extended various forms of support should they choose to return home. 2 ships were allocated for the journey from Vladivostok to Japan. They set sail for London from Japan, from where children, including Romuald Radzievich and his sister Sofia, would be returned to their recently liberated and restored country. Antoni and Natalia Radzievich were the parents of Romuald Radziewicz, 1913 to 2014, who later became a distinguished and decorated soldier in the Polish Armed Forces. A relatively small number of countries recognized the Japanese puppet state of Manchuria. The interwar government of Poland, mindful of the large Polish population in Manchuria, did recognize the state, and no doubt this led to the continuation of good relations between Warsaw and Tokyo, thus facilitating better treatment of some Poles in Manchuria. While ordinary Poles were, as previously mentioned, relatively well treated, this treatment did not always extend to Polish entrepreneurs. The Japanese increased their influence and control of some Polish companies, especially those companies producing materials essential to the war efforts. In particular, Władysław Kowalski's timber business was nationalized by the new regime, and Kowalski, shown in the photo center, was bankrupted and evicted from his residence. He died in Harbin of a heart attack in 1940. In 1935, Japan purchased the Chinese Eastern Railway from the Soviet Union. However, because of an agreement that only Russian personnel could work for the railway and its supporting services, many Poles became unemployed. The regime gave Russians an exclusive right to work for other Japanese companies. The situation for Poles became dire and living standards declined sharply, leading to mass repatriations to Poland. In 1942, basic food products were rationed, and in 1943, rationing was extended to coal, firewood, and wool products. Initially, ration vouchers were issued by the Polish Welfare Committee and then by the Polish Consulate. In August 1945, the Red Army took control of Manchuria. The photograph you can see here is of Soviet tanks in Harbin. This was the beginning of mass deportations to the Soviet Union of Poles, Russians, and other East Europeans living throughout Manchuria. During the period 1945 to 1949, China was engulfed by a civil war between communists and nationalists. By 1946, it was estimated that the number of Poles living in Manchuria was down to around 1,500. During the second half of the 1940s, the post-war Polish government decided to repatriate the remaining Poles from Manchuria. One of the few Polish institutions still functioning in Manchuria was the Gospoda Polska in Harbin. The Polish government sent a delegate to the Gospoda Polska, whose function was to communicate to the remaining Poles an appeal that they urgently needed to leave Manchuria for Poland. The first post-World War II repatriation of 800 Poles was organized by the Polish government. The departure was from Harbin's main railway station, and the train was surrounded by an exceptionally large crowd of Chinese who had turned up to say goodbye to the Poles with whom they had lived and worked with side by side for decades. They surrounded the train carriage with flowers and banners to pay homage to their Polish friends. Following the victory of the Communists and the establishment of the People's Republic of China, the new regime began a campaign of massive repression against Poles in China. Restrictions were placed upon Poles relating to dress codes and hairstyles. The policy of the communist regime was also to expel Poles and all foreigners living in China. The idea was to make China a homogeneous nation, and to this end, the slogan of the Chinese communists was "Asia for the Asians." Poland continued with its policy of repatriation by both rail and sea routes. Most Poles settled in Poland, while some chose Australia, Canada, the USA, Israel, and various countries in South America. By 1963, there were only 18 Poles living in Harbin. At this time, the Polish government, in liaison with the Chinese Communist Party, brought about the closure of the last remaining Polish organization in Harbin, namely the Association of Polish Citizens in China. During the Cultural Revolution, the student-led Red Guards destroyed the Polish Catholic cemetery in Harbin, which had been located within the Russian Orthodox cemetery. The area of the cemetery is now an amusement park and features as one of Harbin's attractions. Following the destruction of the Orthodox cemetery during the Cultural Revolution, some graves were moved to the Huangshan Cemetery. On 10th of February 1993, Edward Stokalski was the last Pole to leave Harbin. He left Harbin to spend the rest of his life in Poland, where he had never been. This was the final chapter of the Polish colony in Harbin. Here is a photograph of Edward Stokalski at the grave of his relative at the Huangshan Cemetery. In December 1947, the CIA reported about the Polish colony in Harbin. This document, marked confidential, was declassified in 2006 and is available with redactions on the CIA's website. The text of the report sheds light on the challenging circumstances faced by Poles in Harbin in 1947. We learn from the report that in 1947 the number of Polish people living in Harbin was roughly 2,000. The Polish consulate in Harbin may have been replaced, albeit unofficially, by the Polish Citizens Committee of Manchuria. Lewicki, first name unknown, is the head of the Polish Association Committee, while V. Jabłoński is the vice chairman. Jalandowski is another high-profile member, first name unknown. Most of the Polish population does not support the Soviet Union, including the committee's members and leaders. About 200 Poles in Harbin identify as progressive and are overtly pro-Soviet, with the remaining Poles preferring to adopt a moderate stance on matters of politics. The Gospoda Polska, supported by the committee, is the center of the Polish community. 2 churches, a middle school, a grammar school, and the Polish Welfare Organization, whose primary duty is to oversee an elderly care facility and a home for the poor, are among those organizations that receive comparable sponsorship. The Chinese Communist government has taken control of the former Polish church mission side. Father Hotniewicz, the former head of the mission, still oversees the work of the 4 priests or missionaries. One of the 2 churches was about to fall into the hands of the Chinese communists. Only the TASS interpretation of global news is presented in the Soviet-dominated Polish newspaper published in Harbin. The Chinese Changchun Railway employs a small number of highly skilled Poles, but Soviet Russians are given preference when it comes to job opportunities. Some non-Soviet Poles have succeeded in running their private businesses. I'll leave a link to the CIA report in the description below. Upon leaving Harbin, most Poles born in Manchuria were to see their ancestral homeland for the first time. It is entirely likely that some of the younger Polish participants in this delightful photograph made it back to Poland either by independent means or through official repatriations carried out by the post-war Polish government. The main settlement areas of the Harbin Poles are in the West Pomeranian, particularly in Szczecin, and the Lower Silesian voivodeships in Poland. While some Poles and other Eastern Europeans came voluntarily to Harbin and Manchuria, I would class this as a forced migration of people who wish to escape Russification and better their economic future. The many repatriations to Poland that occurred after the 1930s, and particularly those during China's Cultural Revolution, were unavoidable, and most certainly they were migrations very much forced. The collage of advertisements shown here is from the Polish Weekly in Harbin, dated 7th of May 1939. As previously explained, this was a challenging time for the Poles in Harbin. Manchuria was under Japanese occupation, and World War II, which would bring more hardships, was about to begin. The Polish émigrés that came to Harbin were in it for the long term. Essentially, they planned for Harbin to be their forever home, free of Russian colonization. Their diligent work ethic, combined with a high standard of school education, planned for future generations to be knowledgeable of Polish culture and traditions and be able to continue building on the success of their forefathers. This video is based on a post about the Polish colony in Harbin on the South Coast View website. I'll leave a link to the post in the description. In the post you will also find a full list of my sources. If you enjoyed this video, do give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.